Hi, in this lesson, we'll talk about Databricks workflows. We talked about Databricks jobs, and we know that when someone create a notebook in development environment, then you wanted to run this notebook in an interval. Let's say every 1 hour, you run the notebook to process the data. It all comes down to how often your data arrives to Databricks or to the storage. Is it every hour? Is it every day? Is it every 20 hour? Or it continuously flowing to Databricks? We call this a stream. Well, the other type, we call it a batch because it arrive, big bulk arrive every certain interval. So you bought this notebook, you take the same notebook, you run it as a production environment, you run it as a job. And every job, like I said before, have a schedule. Like it's run it at 9 a.m., say, or 6 a.m. So you run. So what happens if, okay, I actually created an application, my data, I didn't put all the processing steps in one notebook. This is good and ideal when you run everything, when everything that you need to process the data is in one notebook. This is sometimes work, and actually most of the time you will find that you can do everything in one notebook, but sometimes for modularity, you wanted to break down your notebooks or your job into multiple notebooks. So maybe it's a very, very big job. So you have someone uh, from your team created one notebook, and another member of the team created another notebook. And maybe there is another third one that also created another notebook, and so on and so forth, right? So these three team members, each one created a notebook. Now, when you run it in production, you wanted a sequence between this notebook. You wanted to run notebook from A first, then notebook from C first, second, then notebook from B. In other words, you wanted to do it like this. You can run code from A, then C, then B, right? So you wanted to run it in a sequence. We call this a workflow because there is a workflow here. Or maybe actually you wanted to run A and then you run D and then B. So you wanted to branch. After A, run these two notebooks in parallel. After you run them in parallel, converge or go back to B to run all of them. And you wanted to run them as a one job. We call this a workflow. So let's see how you can create workflows on Databricks environment. So all you need to do here, you go to Databricks. You go to your data science and engineering, and then there is workflows right there on the left side. You click, and you can create a job. So every workflow is a job. We start with a job. So we create a job. Let's call it data workflow. Start. This is the first job. Well, let workflow stop. This is my workflow. I call it my data workflow. Or actually, maybe we can call it this first task. This is the first task. It has, I can run, you can actually run several things here. Let's make this a little bit smaller. So you can run a notebook, you can run just a Python script, a wheel, you can run a SQL query, a Delta Life table pipeline, a DBT. You can run many things on this job. The most common one is a notebook. So I'm going to choose a notebook. And then the source, where do you want to get your notebook from? From my workspace. It's already in my workspace here. Select the notebook. So go to users. I know where is my notebook. Let's select a random one. One of the random ones here. So I'm just going to pick something random. So I'm going to quick start notebook. Select. Now you choose the cluster here. There is two types of cluster. Job cluster, existing all-purpose cluster. When you run in production, always use the job cluster because it's cheaper and it makes your life easier with billing and everything. But some cases you wanted to choose an all-purpose cluster. If you are in development environment, use all-purpose cluster. In that case, I'm going to choose my all-purpose cluster just for the sake of it, and then I'm done. You can add additional settings. So you can add a library. Does my code uses a library that I have to install on the cluster with pip install or something? You can add it here. Click, undo bye-bye. I add the library name, and Databricks will automatically pick up the library, install it on the cluster before it starts the job. Or I can upload the files of the library directly if I wanted to. Does my job have a parameters? If yes, I can add the parameters here. Emails. I want to get notification about this job when it starts, when it finishes successfully, or on failures. Very, very handy. Very, very good to monitor your jobs. If there is a failure, it sends an email. So you can pick up the email and someone from your team or yourself can go and fix the problem with the job. I always use the failure one for the critical jobs. Retries. What if your job failed in the middle? Should it just fail and do nothing, or you wanted Databricks to retry the job? Very handy, especially for streaming. Remember when I said streaming data continuously flowing 24/7? If something is stuck in the middle and your cluster for somehow crashed, you ask Databricks, okay, immediately retry, create a new cluster and continue the processing. You don't want it like just sit like that. So for streaming jobs, always add a retry and make it unlimited. You can choose to try 1 time, 2 times. For streaming jobs, use unlimited. That's the best option. How often should it wait before it does the next retry? Again, you can choose the number here. Or if it's time out retry on time out, like it timed out on something. Time out, this is the time out for your queries. This is the maximum completion time for this task. That's pretty much it for the job, and then you click create. When you do that, you see here you have one task, right? Let's add a second one. A second task. You can add task 2, right? It's a notebook from the workspace. Everything is pretty much the same. The notebook, I'm going to choose something from a random, I don't know, this one. I'm not going to run this workflow. I'm just demonstrating it, how it works. Can I leave everything here? It depends on number 1. Okay, I'm going to leave it the same. And then you have created your your job, your cluster, and if you wanted to, you can create a new one. Let's say you have created your job, and it's now you can create a task. So you created the second one. You can click third one. Let's see how we can make a parallel task this time. So create task 3. Let's exactly do this one here. So we have 1, 2, 3, but then there is D depending on the first one that goes to the third one. Let's do that exactly here. So we have a task 3 notebook. I'm going to select notebook from here, make something random. Just picking something here. I'm just going to create. So we created a 3 tasks. If you zoom out, see there's one here. Let's create one that is dependent on first task, but then it runs in parallel to task 2 and then fall back to task 3. How we do that? We click task 4. Initially it will be stitched to the last one. Let's keep it the same. Task 4. So select the notebook, just picking something random from here. Okay, you're done. Now here you see something called dependency. I want it to be dependent on first task. Okay, create. Now this task here, I want it to be dependent because I want it to be dependent on this as well. So I'm going to stitch it back to this one, the task 2 and task 4. So we have created, zoom out, save task. So now I created my workflow. Let's zoom out a little bit. So see my workflows now exactly that I wanted to have. So you have a workflow, start with first task, run it. Once it finishes, it runs 2 parallel notebooks at the same time to process 2 different tables. After you're done, I create a third task or the last task that aggregate maybe everything from the previous 2 and run it. Once you do that, you can then choose here, right? This is the frequency, how often you wanted to run this workflow. And add a schedule. I wanted my workflow add a scheduled every day at, I don't know, this time. So yeah, save. So to run with the schedule. So I created a schedule. This is my compute. By default, you see here, this one for this task, everything runs on this compute. I can choose, I can view cluster, swap it, change it, logs metrics. It's 2 cluster here. So you can run, you can choose to run everything on the same cluster, or choose the, like in this one accidentally, but it's actually useful to demonstrate. The first job will run on my all-purpose cluster. The other 3 you see highlighted here will run on this job cluster. Maybe you can change this one, swap, and then there's this one, update. So now everything runs on the same cluster. Very handy. So your cluster will start one time, run everything, and it finishes. And that's how you create a workflow. You can choose now to run the workflow, and it will be run. So if you go now to jobs, you have your workflow here ready, and you can start it, or it will automatically run at the time that you specified. So that's it for this lesson, and see you in the next lesson.